Are we starting?
No, sir, we have a little time.
Eshwar,
Okay,
may
sir, we are
kind
good to
begin.
go.
Yes.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Secretary Media of Law Student Council, 𝗍𝗱 𝗠𝗲𝗶𝗏, and I'll be your host for today's webinar session. We have our honorable guest speaker, Muhammad Ahmed Pansota, with us too. Muhammad Ahmed Pansota has done initial education from Aitchison College, Lahore, and also did Bachelor's of Law from University College, Lahore. Later on, did his bar at law from Inns of Court School Law, London. Barrister Pansota has outstanding legal expertise and also co-founded Ahmed and Pansota in 2007. Beyond his courtroom appearances, he is also a renowned face of national TV channels, lending his insights as a legal expert. He is also an elected member of Bar Representation Committee of the Honorable Society of Lincoln's Inn. He also serves as the chairperson of Council of Complaints, PAMRA, Lahore. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We welcome you to the webinar series. So, any starting remarks you would like to add?
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak, and I look forward to answering the questions, and hopefully will answer them to the best of my abilities.
Thank you so much, sir. Before now, let's start the questionnaire session. So, sir, what does the term right to information really means, and what Article 19A of Constitution actually says?
Well, right to information basically is a concept, because you see, you need to understand that the Constitution of Pakistan hinges on the principle of information primarily, and the Constitution itself is all about guaranteeing the rights of individuals, which are in the chapter dealing with it, rights starting from Article 8 to, I believe, 28, 29. And all of these guarantee different rights. One of the rights being right to information, which is a fundamental right. So I have the right to know how is the government functioning, how are the government agencies functioning. Now, this right is further, it hinges upon the principle of Islamic jurisprudence. Even in Islam, if you understand, we are governed by a constitution that primarily rests on the principles of Islam, one way or the other. So if you minutely observe that, you will find out that even in the concept of Islamic jurisprudence, the right to know is a fundamental right, and the right to find out. Just to give you an example of Khalifa Umar, when he was presiding, and there was a gentleman who just stood up and said, "We want to know, where did you get these clothes from?" So this concept emanates, it's a world concept, and in democracies, the very accountability itself hinges upon the idea of knowing, or the information, or the inflow information. So you see, this right to information and this right to know emanates from Article 19, which is guaranteed in the Constitution of Pakistan, and right to is, once again, as I just said, is a fundamental right envisaged under the Constitution of Pakistan.
Okay, so sir, as the Article 19A gives the right of information getting from government institutes. So, what kind of information we can take from government institutes, and at what extent we can take?
You see, there are certain confines in these articles under the Constitution of Pakistan. Any information dealing with the integrity of Pakistan, dealing with the armed forces, or where the stake of Pakistan with the other countries is involved, that information which is likely to prejudice those relations, that is where you can't seek that information. But apart from that, any information related to government functionaries, let's say, just to give you an example, you want to know what is the monthly expense of Governor House, or you want to know what's the monthly expense of Chief Minister's house. If Chief Minister Punjab has announced a project, you see, this entire concept emanates from the preface of the Constitution, that ultimately the most powerful, the most magnificent is the God, and then people of Pakistan have the right to choose their representatives. So then, people of Pakistan, once they choose you, the representatives are then answerable. So in furtherance of that, to establish that accountability is only possible if the people of Pakistan are in a position to know what the representatives are doing. So it relates to representatives as well. It relates to the bureaucratic branch, the judiciary branch, all of these just to make them accountable to the people of Pakistan. Then the people of Pakistan try to find out this information. any information that involves taxpayers' money.
So does it give a free hand to its subjects to exercise their rights without any restrictions, or there are any limitations in the particular article?
Well, there are limitations as well. As I just said, limitations are also mentioned in Article 19 and 19A as well, which are basically just not unfettered. You cannot go and seek every information, and information which is likely to cause maybe a religious turmoil, which is against the provisions of Islam, or against the very concept of the state of Pakistan, or any information which is likely to prejudice the relationship of two countries of Pakistan, such contracts or anything, that cannot be sought, then related to the armed forces of Pakistan. But apart from that, all government institutions are answerable.
Okay. So does there are any observations which are given the Supreme Court under Article 19A, or there are any observations
Yes.
related to RTI?
Well, there are several judgments on that point. You see, you've got Metro Orange Train judgment, then Court and High Court judgment, Article 19 and 19A have been discussed. And Supreme Court and the Lahore High Court and several other high courts throughout the country, they've been absolutely clear when it gets to gathering information. Because Supreme Court has time and again mentioned that right to information and right to get this information is a fundamental right, and it can be used in any context. So Supreme Court of Pakistan has been very, very clear in a couple of landmark judgments that it is the fundamental duty of the state to provide its, proletariat, to provide its electorate,
Okay, so
which
sir,
is their,
we have heard.
fundamental right.
Okay, so sir, we have heard this word ihtisab over the years for so many times. So does ihtisab comes under RTI, or they are interconnected, or they are different, two different concepts?
Well, I don't know what's the structure of your webinar today. If I can also pitch in with the other language as well, because since you use the
Yeah,
word
for
from
sure.
Urdu, एहतसाब. देखें,
Yeah.
एहतसाब के लिए बड़ा important है understand करना कि एहतसाब है कि एहतसाब is accountability. अकाउंटेबिलिटी वो प्रिंसिपल है जिसके ऊपर हम सब हिंज करते हैं, और उस प्रिंसिपल जो है, उस प्रिंसिपल के अंदर फिर आपकी राइट टू इन्फॉर्मेशन आती है, आपकी हर तरह की एहतसाब आता है, आपका लोगों को डील करना आता है, स्टेट कैसे लोगों से बात करती है. तो ये एक बड़ी ब्रॉडर टर्म है. लेकिन हमारे यहाँ अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो वर्ड एहतसाब और दी अकाउंटेबिलिटी इज यूज्ड मोस्टली to politically victimize your opponents, or to use in the context of punishing your political opponents, and that too mainly in the context of corruption cases. But ihtisab overall is an overarching term, and that term is quite wide, which can be used in a lot of ways.
So is there any connection between RTI and ihtisab? It is also a right to information, that we get the information how about the earnings and all the stuff.
You see, the very concept of accountability, what is it? You see, when state functionaries, or when a government is elected, they are accountable to their people. And one of the main accountabilities, or one of the main areas where they're accountable, is the use of public funds. Because this money is generated through taxation. We all pay taxes, and then this money is generated. And then you appoint these people or elect these people to take decisions on your behalf. So when they're taking decisions, the very accountability, or the first pillar of accountability itself, is to connect the two: accountability and information. So just to check for a citizen if some government department is being accountable or not, you firstly get information. Even in the case of Metro Orange, if you remember, firstly the information was sought, and then on the basis of that information, the entire project was challenged. That why are these contracts not being entered into in such a in this particular way? Why are these contracts being kept secret? And several other things. So unless you know, you're not in a position to hold somebody accountable.
Okay. So another thing, we have seen bureaucratic involvement in political and non-political activities. So does RTI law suffer from bureaucratic attitudes too? So can you hear me?
Gee, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Okay, so I'll repeat the question. So I was asking, as we have seen the bureaucratic involvement in political and non-political activities, so how RTI laws suffer from bureaucratic attitudes?
I'm sorry. Once again, your voice distorted. You said in the bureaucratic structures. What's your question?
Sir, I'm asking, RTI laws suffer from bureaucratic attitudes?
It does. It does. It does greatly suffer from these bureaucratic attitudes which is under the RTI law. You've got the information commissioners both at the federal and the provincial levels. Now, these commissioners have to work like anything to get this information because generally bureaucrats are reluctant to provide this information, and bureaucrats are usually the head of a particular department. Let's say if there's a Ministry of Finance, then the finance secretary is the bureaucratic head of that, and he is also under the law comes under the definition of government. So from that point of view, if you see there is a startling bureaucratic hurdle that is usually created by these bureaucrats, which is why then a citizen has to go to court, firstly through filing of a petition under RTI, and then if it doesn't help, then he goes to High Court under 199.
Okay. So, sir, fortunately or unfortunately, Pakistan has faced many martial laws. So, during martial laws, how RTI is practiced and protected?
Well, it's been very, very unfortunate that Pakistan has had martial laws in the past. But once it's a military regime or a martial law, of course, the first and the foremost action that is taken is to stop the inflow of the information. And whenever there is a stop, whenever somebody is stopped from speaking, somebody is stopped from saying anything, or the communication gap is created, then of course it is amply clear that it leads to lack of accountability, as we were just discussing a while ago. So yes, in the military regimes, it has been very, very unfortunate that things are usually kept in secret and there is no accountability, hence a very stringent flow of information.
Okay, sir. So, moving on to the next question, RTI has a great relation with media, and media is considered as one of the important pillar of democracy. So, how media activism is how Article 19 is 19A facilitates media?
Well, one of the things that a lot of people on media have used, they have tried to obtain information from government departments through filing of RTI petitions. So yes, there is first of all a connection. Now media also relies heavily on RTI, and petitions are usually filed. Then media hinges on the freedom of expression, and then of course the right to information. So we seek our information from media. So media in turn has to be very, very clear and has to be very accountable when it comes to giving information. And that information cannot be wrong or false. So that information cannot be doctored. So at the end of the day, media is eliciting information, which is, of course, there are several ways of eliciting that information and then obviously relaying that information to the public at large. So there is, in my view, there is a very, very great connection. And I also got a chance to serve as Chairman Council of Complaints. That is precisely where people would file any complaints, and I got the chance to review that for 6 years. And one of the main key aspects was the information itself.
So, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Just a minute. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so sir, we have seen media activism in judicial proceedings. There's a lot of involvement of media in trials. So how they are helping out for fair and free trials? So can you hear me?
Sorry, your voice just froze for a while. Can you come again?
Okay, I can ask again. So, sir, yeah, I was asking that we have seen media involvement in so many judicial proceedings and judicial trials. So, how it is affecting judicial proceedings?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Well, media has been very, very instrumental while shaping up, I would say, court proceedings, because there used to be a time when the senior most judges, the superior court judges, would play it to the gallery. And when media is present in court, when you've got these court correspondents, there are certain things that the judges are wary of. So what happens in the end is that there is a positive sign and there is a negative as well. I'll go with the positive. The positive being that media has been the watchdog and has always played a very instrumental in ensuring that judges they act in accordance with law. They act in accordance with the constitution. But at the same time, there have been negative pressures which have been created, and especially in the times of 𝗍𝗱 𝗠𝗲𝗱𝗶 when he was the Chief Justice, he would make sure that he just lands into any suo motu proceedings without actually giving it a thought at times. So there, I would say media has been very, very. It was a negative role that was played at times, but by and large, media is a tool that is generally used to compel the judiciary into taking action, into ensuring that fair judgment comes out. I can sort of cite innumerable judgments where media has played a vital role. You see, especially like one of the examples can be a very recent example of this young kid who has been brutally tortured, Rizwana, and there is a domestic workers case going on. Then there was another domestic workers case, 𝗍𝗱, who was brutally tortured, and several 𝗲𝗱, I can name innumerable cases, political cases, all other cases. So I believe media is one watchdog which can play a very important role, but at times they go overboard, and that is where the judiciary needs to be very, very careful.
So media is helping out in fair trials.
Indeed, indeed. I would say it's helping more as opposed to not helping. I think it's helping more.
So there are any influence of media in judicial judgments or a court procedure they affect it, or whether there is any involvement of media in judgments?
Well, I wouldn't say that they start writing judgments, but of course, they influence it to a level where judges are bound to write a few things, judges are bound to develop a few things. Certain jurisprudence that I would say was always developed by the judges because media took it up. There are a lot of areas where media, I mean, I'll give you one example. I've been very, very instrumental. There was an article written in the Dawn about food wastage by an advocate, Iman Bindial. We took it to Lahore High Court. Justice Jawad Hassan passed a landmark judgment on the food wastage. That is a reported judgment under my name, Muhammad Ahmed Pansota versus Federation of Pakistan. So here, media played a very important role. Then domestic workers law. It was reported that there was no law about the domestic workers. Eventually, we were appointed as amicus in the court, and that law was eventually made. Then about transgenders. I remember there was a movie that I had challenged wherein the word khusra was used. And then once we had filed the petition, that was removed. Similarly, there was an awareness that was created about dog culling in Pakistan. That was taken. Animal rights, and I can just drugs. All of these areas. So media has played a very, very important role, and also to the extent where judgments were written in such a way that it reflects the issue in particular in such a way that the issue was addressed. So yes, I would say absolutely phenomenal role of media in a lot of areas.
Okay, so sir, we have seen the biasness of media, especially in political cases. We have seen media affiliated with certain parties and other things. So how this affects the assessments of general public, general scrutiny, how this affects?
Well, like I said initially, that there are times when media has played, and I wouldn't say the entire media. There's a portion of media that at times has certain interests that they have to toe and follow, and in doing so, they take cases to a level. The reporting goes to a level where judiciary is coerced into writing such judgments. But that is where the judiciary is to be held responsible for not doing justice, even if some power group or pressure group is pressurizing you, but that doesn't mean that you don't do justice. Justice is to be done and is seen to be done as well. So yes, there are negative I would say examples as well. Without going into those examples and controversial examples, media at times goes overboard. And whenever I say media in the negative sense, I would say there's a portion of that media. You cannot target the entire media like that.
Okay, so we have also seen that media is violating privacy of the victim and culprit too. For the sake of ratings and viewership, media often commercializes very sensitive cases. So how does this affect the privacy of victim and culprit, and what kind of effect it takes place on the case too?
Well, there are laws in place, especially PEMRA law takes care of that. And like I said before, that when I was chairman council of complaints, there were several cases that would come up before me. And there is a code of conduct of 2015, which is the electronic media code of conduct, and they're bound to follow that. And that provides for, let's say, identity of the victim, identity of a child, let's say, victim, then how ladies are to be treated, and many other areas that electronic media code of conduct takes care of. Your content has to correspond to the provisions of Islam, the Constitution of Pakistan, the laws of the country. So if that is followed in letter and spirit, then media is not bound to, I would say, go or at least jeopardize the case of any victim. But yes, at times the way they, sort of cover a story, it gives an impression that Article 10A, which is the due process, is not being followed. So I think if due process is not done, or fair trial is not given to an accused, then in that event, the whole process of the whole point of the Constitution of Pakistan goes down the window.
So, sir, what are the legal safeguards are in place to ensure that media coverage of ongoing judicial proceedings remains accurate and unbiased and respectful to the legal process too?
Well, there are several laws in place. Like I said before, PEMRA being one, code of conduct of the PEMRA Electronic Media Code of Conduct being second, then the Constitution of Pakistan itself, and several other laws where they are supposed to report it in an accurate and fair manner. If it's a sub judice matter, they are supposed to exercise restraint. They cannot. There is a judgment which is the famous Ashad Sharif case, PLD 2019 Supreme Court 1. It says that you cannot comment on the outcome of the proceedings in such a way that the judicial verdict is affected, or you start commenting on that. Then you said that if somebody is in custody, you cannot go and take the statement. Then when you're interviewing a child victim, you have to be very, very careful. So all of these laws are there in place. But if they're not followed and implemented in letter and spirit, then of course things are bound to go wrong.
Okay, so role of media in media activism in holding the judiciary accountable and ensuring transparency in its functions. Are there any potential pitfalls to be aware of?
Well, I personally feel that it is not media's job to be holding everybody accountable all the time. It is their job to uh, elicit information, to transfer or give information, and that too in an accurate way. The judgment is to be made by the people of Pakistan, and in case of a department, by that department head. But you can't expect, and you should not allow media to be making media trials or media statements about that. They're just supposed to give you an information. Okay, this is the information that I have produced before you. So you then decide on the basis of that.
Okay. So, what are the basic how to control the unhealthy media involvement in legal proceedings? The victims can do anything, and is there any legal implementations for that too?
I think first and most foremost, if there's any unethical or illegal behavior on part of the media, it must be reported. It must be reported to the concerned quarters. Like I said, I was heading the Council of Complaints. I tried my level best to keep it very, very independent. So these councils have to be appointed in such a way that independent people go and sit there, and then they're able to decide the cases. Recently, Justice Mansoor-Ali-Shah passed a landmark judgment on the jurisdiction of PEMRA, and they said this Council of Complaint is very, very important when it comes to holding media accountable. So I'll give you example of how the council can and could hold the media accountable. You see, we had several cases. One of the cases being that I was once able to give a judgment on obscenity, because prior to that everything was obscene and there were certain things which were not obscene. So then for the first time there were certain confines that were defined. Then in the context of transgender, he passed a judgment that how transgenders are to be addressed on national media. Then respect for animals, animal rights, how are these animals? So gradually with these judgments, with these pronouncements, what essentially you're doing is that you're developing law. You're developing law to a level where people will start understanding, especially media. So media initially was very, very reluctant to follow that, but then all of them appreciated the fact that there is a code which is being implemented, and there is nothing that is being implemented out of the box.
So, in cases involving national security and sensitive information, how does the right to know interact with limitations on freedom of expression and media coverage, the relation of media coverage to?
Well, one has to be careful when it comes to that because it's a constitutional confine. I mean, even if I like it or not, the most important thing is that there's a constitutional confine that you need to sort of follow. So from that angle, media has to be very, very careful. Even in the PEMRA laws itself, the code of conduct, they're very, very careful when it comes to covering any issue of national importance, any issue which is capable of landing Pakistan into any sort of trouble. I mean, you're allowed to report, but you're not allowed to report it to a level where you start hurling accusations, where you start giving information which is sensitive and secret. So from that point of view, media has to be very, very responsible. And by and large, media is responsible when it comes to national interest.
And so, how do you see news anchors and analysts giving their remarks on sub judice cases on live television?
Well, I think that needs to be seriously checked. And even before I say anything, if you minutely study PLD 2019 Supreme Court 1, the famous Arshid Sharif case, that was a code of conduct was formed after the Hamid Mir judgment, and that code was made in 2015. So as far as sub judice matters are concerned, you have to be very careful that you don't start discussing these cases in such a way that you give out your opinions कि ये होना चाहिए, वो होना चाहिए, फला होना चाहिए, unless you are giving information, that is fine. But if you start discussing the outcome of the case or outcome in such a way that it affects the outcome, I believe that that needs to be checked. So the anchors in Pakistan, with due respect to majority of them, I think the first and the foremost for an anchor should be to study that subject and then to invite people relevant to that subject. You cannot invite me on an issue which I don't know of. Let's you come and say, come and speak on maritime law or marine laws. If I'm not familiar with that, then I should not be invited. This is something that I had also raised with one of the chief justices in Pakistan, that media should only invite people who are experts of that area. Otherwise, how do you expect me to speak on anti-terrorism laws if I've not done any legal case in that context? So this is one of the areas where I think the Pakistani media seriously needs to improve, because generally you see people sitting and talking about subjects that are not even relevant to their field. This is then that creates inflow of wrong information. So on the basis of that wrong information, then people develop opinions. So once those opinions are formed, then people eventually start practicing those opinions कि जी ये तो कल को एक दिन के अंदर अंदर लेट से किसी की सजा मुअत्तल हो जाएगी, without realizing कि उसके ऊपर law क्या कहता है. So I think one has to be very, very careful. So news anchors can at least do two things. A, study it in and out before doing the program, and then invite somebody, to say the least, who knows the subject.
Okay, so how do you see the contempt of court proceedings and anyone who disagrees with any judicial proceedings or who breaches the boundaries?
I am not somebody who believes in the contempt of court. I think there should be no contempt except a few areas, especially if somebody refuses to follow a judgment. That's a separate area. But if somebody starts enforcing contempt on the face of the court, in the face of the court, sorry, or where a judge feels threatened or where a judge feels that somebody is being extremely derogatory, unless somebody is crossing the line, I think everybody should be allowed to say whatever you want to say, and of course in decent words, and you should not be allowed to hurl abuses or accusations like that. But generally, contempt of court law should be slightly less stringent. It should not be, and it should be sparingly used.
Okay, so I think this will be the last question from my side, and after that we will take questions from comment section which our viewers have sent. So considering global best practices, what recommendations which you could produce to enhance the effectiveness of media activism and upholding the right to information within Pakistani judicial processes?
Well, international best practices, I would say, first of all, media internal editorial policies need to be improved. The media houses have to first hold their representatives accountable for any wrong reporting, for anything wrong that they're doing. Unless there is an internal mechanism in place, nothing can be done. Secondly, internationally, if you see, the inflow of information largely depends on credible sources. You can't just say, कि जी मैंने कल सुना था ये हुआ है. No, no, no. You have to quote something. You have to quote important documents, journals, and documents that are reliable, documents that people have a consensus on. But if you think that you can say pretty much anything which doesn't even have a trace, that is where things go south. So I think one has to be very, very careful. These are the best international practices that you can follow.
Okay, sir. So now we will move on to comment section. So first question we have from Bushra Hassan, and she's asking, sir, that is there any legal retirement to live camera quotes? Does the Article 19 ensure live camera quotes?
Well, there is a split view on that. Recently, Supreme Court dilated upon that as well, and I believe that I think one of the judges wanted live hearing of their cases, but so far it has not been allowed. I am of the view that live coverage of courts should be allowed, and people should be able to see what happens in court. Why is it kept in secret? If it's an open court, anybody can come to the court. Why can't it be live telecasted on TV as well? I think it was just Atar Manila who gave a judgment on that point. But what I see in the coming years to happen is that it will be live telecasted one way or the other.
So there are any drawbacks of live telecasting court proceedings?
Well, I don't see as far as I'm concerned, but yes, the only drawbacks are that it is being reported, sensitive questions at times can are taken up, and that not everything should be made public, and not public should not be able to see such sensitive areas. But apart from that, I think anybody who's in court should, people of Pakistan should be allowed to see what the courts of Pakistan are doing, if they're doing justice to their institution or not.
Okay, so sir, next question we have from Hassan Janjua. He's asking, what is the impact of media's involvement in judicial proceedings or judicial decisions, and do you think there should be any restrictions on media's involvement in judicial proceedings?
I don't think so. There should be any restriction like that, but yes, code of conduct should be followed. And as I said before, that the judgment of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Arshad Sharif case speaks volumes about how and what should be done while covering the Supreme Court of Pakistan. You have to be extra careful because you need to understand that judges of Pakistan or the Supreme Court cannot respond to you directly. They cannot do press conferences. All they can do is that they can write their judgments. So one has to be very, very careful while making any statement about them.
Okay, so sir, as being said that every film has riddles too. So media needs that, or is it a great need these days?
A great need. What is the great need?
Of the limitations on the
Well,
freedom of right.
I'm not somebody who believes in limitations. I'm somebody who believes in opening up and saying things. I don't believe in restrictions. I don't even believe in criminal defamation laws. I believe that everything should be allowed to be said. This is how people refine and this is how people develop with time. And if you restrict, very famous that bol ke lab azad hai tere. If you're allowed to say stuff, only then can you develop. Otherwise, if everything is restricted, I don't think so anything develops in restrictions.
Okay, so next question we have from Momina Zegam, and she's saying salam to you and asking, do you think there is a blurring of lines between media's freedom of expression and speech and defamation of person?
Well, like I just answered, defamation on the civil side should be very strongly enforced. And if somebody makes a false statement which has lowered your reputation in the estimation of others, that should be culpable. But yes, I don't think so that there should be such a fine line. I agree that defamation laws should be in place. But yes, generally people should be allowed. If somebody wants to criticize a judge, he should be allowed to do so. If somebody wants to criticize government of Pakistan, he should be allowed to do so. That is how societies develop. That is how मुआशरे बनते हैं. इस तरह अगर आप इजाजत ना देंगे तो वो चीजें तो फिर नुकसानदेह.
Okay, sir. So we have one more question from Hamad Khan, and he's asking what legal resources is available for media activists if their right to access information about judicial proceedings is unjustly restricted.
Well, as far as judicial proceedings are concerned, I think there are certain restrictions. But apart from that, if somebody is not providing you with any information, you can file an application before the Right to Information Commission, the Information Commission, and I'm sure they will provide it to you unless it doesn't fall in one of the exceptions.
Okay, sure. So this was our last question. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and giving us your precious knowledge. So any ending note you would like to add, sir?
I think it's a wonderful initiative that you have taken, and this information itself that we've elicited today will greatly help people who were either watching or listening to whatever we were saying. So I think these webinars should be held on regular basis. This is how the youth of Pakistan will understand their fundamental rights, especially this particular right of information. So I'm thankful to you for allowing me this opportunity to talk to all the youngsters here.
So any advice would you like to give to all the viewers? We have so many law students watching us. So any advice would you like to give them?
Speak the truth and fear no man.
So thank you so much. So this is it for today. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us time and blessing us with your knowledge. So thank you so much to all the viewers to signing off for today. Stay connected to Law Students Council. This is it for today. Allah Hafiz.